Welcome /malicious compliance. My first job was a lesson in work to rule, a very obedient payback. I got hired onto my first job when I was 17. It was something of a fast food / coffee shop blend, and in my region, there are more of these chains than there are Starbucks chains. After a 10-minute interview and some paperwork, I was hired on. I would later find out that minors were the preferred hires at this location, since it was likely their first job, and they might in turn be unfamiliar with labor laws. My mother makes a decent income going to work sites and dealing with on-site injuries, labor rights infractions, and so on. Her job is to make workplaces safer and spare them potential lawsuits. Through the stories she shared and the online handbook I devoured about labor rights in my region, I had a decent picture of how ethical workplaces operate. As it turns out, my new workplace was not so ethical. Your breaks were considered more of a privilege than a right, and you could be pulled out of your break to help up front at any time, with no opportunity to make up that break time later. I earned a great deal of scorn from my manager by asking for a 30-minute break on my 7-hour shift instead of a 15-minute one here. You are legally entitled to 30 minutes for every 5 hours worked. There were so many weird corner-cutting things going on that could create a disaster scenario in terms of safety. Climbing on whatever is available instead of using the ladder. The ladder was broken, poor food safety, and the occasional fire in the toaster oven, because new hires weren't instructed on how to use it safely. Not much instruction on how to use the corrosive cleaners, and if you had to clean the oven in the back kitchen, you were lucky if you received an unused mask or PPE that wasn't damaged. Burns, rashes, sprained ankles and cuts were not uncommon. I badly burned my arm with hot coffee and immediately went to treat it, then asked for the right forms to fill out to report on my injury. I was scolded for leaving the front end, told there were no forms, and informed that no one reports on burns. Anyway, if we reported every burn or slip and fall in a coffee shop, we'd never get through all the paperwork. The burn blistered with time and eventually required some prescription antibiotic cream from my physician. I was fed up, but intimidated at the thought of trying to formally report these people for safety and labor violations. Everyone else seemed to accept what was going on. I was trying to save money to move out, and in my head, the odds of getting hired elsewhere seemed slim. I decided to do something unconventional. I thought I was the first to come up with it at the time, but I would later find out that my plan was a classic workers' protest tactic. I was going to work to rule. Follow every policy to the exact letter, which would inevitably slow things down and create obstacles to efficiency. It started with the cappuccino machine and the iced drink machine. The cappuccino machine is to be cleaned once daily, and the iced drink machine is to be changed weekly. These are both lengthy processes that leave the machines out of commission for a while. No one did it regularly, and we had an issue in the past where we got complaints about the taste of the iced drinks, only to pop the top off the machine and discover some kind of filmy, moldy growth on the surface. Seemed like a good place to start. I took great cares to drain them and give the detachable parts a long soak and a thorough scrub. This angered customers who wanted their drinks right away. I'd been there for a while at this point and instructed anyone I trained not to hesitate to get the manager if their customer has an issue they can't resolve. And so it went that every shift involved me cleaning some machine and my manager placating impatient customers. We had this pre-prepared specialty tea that almost never got ordered, but nonetheless, it was policy to change the pot of tea every 30 minutes for freshness. No one did this. The tea would sit for hours. I decided this tea needed special attention and made sure I was changing it regularly. The result was that we went through our stock faster than we ever had before. We frequently ran out, and the stock orders had to be changed to accommodate a greater supply of the tea. I took cares to check our freshness dates on the pre-packaged foods. If it was expired, it was trash. This pained me, as I don't like to waste food, but we had a strict policy on freshness of product. I tried to wiggle on this, only throwing it out if it was 3+ days over. Nonetheless, the result was empty display cases, low stock, and a need to, again, adjust stock to accommodate for the food supply needs that come into play when policy is actually being followed. I was assigned a sandwich and soup station, perhaps in an effort to keep me away from other things. However, it was wonderful new territory to work to rule. I changed gloves after every order, as the handbook indicated we should. I took cares to clean out all the receptacles before putting new toppings in them. The handbook indicated we were supposed to cool vats of soup in ice baths to bring them to a safe temperature before storing them in the fridge. I made sure it was done, which was inconvenient to management when they could have had me working on something else before the shift was over. I kept abiding by the rules, rigidly and to their fullest extent. Management was incredibly pissed off and communicated as much when I wasn't around. However, I had turned 18 by this point. I could now legally work past a certain time, supervise the teenage employees and close the store until they hired on someone else who could work the hours I was working. It was something of a pickle for them. I also offered no hostility or indication I was being spiteful. If you were on the outside looking in, you might see me as an employee who did the jobs no one else wanted to do. It wouldn't have been easy to call me out to higher ups. My coworkers, despite the inconveniences by proxy they probably had to put up with, didn't seem to mind. They were interested to see how it would play out and told me as much. I decided to quit after a conversation with the store owner herself. She indicated that she wasn't fond of kids who think they know how to run a business she's been running for years, and had some other choice words for me. I told her on the spot, "Oh, I understand completely. I'll submit my written notice for you tomorrow." My resignation letter wasn't just a resignation letter. The first few lines were as much. What followed was a list of safety infractions and labor law violations with dates and examples attached. It was incomplete, since I only started recording these a few months in, yet it managed to be pretty extensive. I said something along the lines of, "I trust you will address these problems in a timely manner." There was a quiet implication in some of my other language that the Better Business Bureau, Health Inspector and associated safety organizations in my region would be happy to help them out. I gave 2 weeks notice in the interests of my coworkers, who would have had to take extra shifts if I left abruptly. I was scheduled for 5 of the 14 days. They wanted me out, and they wanted me out as soon as they could get me out. I didn't return to this location for several months, even though I lived fairly close to it. I eventually got curious and went back to check things out. The place looked very different. You walked in, and it just felt cleaner. The employees looked happier, though I didn't see any familiar faces. The location had come under new ownership and had been completely turned around. I have no idea if I played a role in the store changing hands or getting fixed up. I only know that for several months, I was a relentless pain in the ass for quietly, obediently following the rules, and I left a letter in my wake that created unease. TL. Doctor, my first job was at a coffee shop with major safety and labor law violations. I decided to follow all the rules to the exact letter. Chaos ensued. I quit with a letter indicating the laws they broke. Store ends up under new ownership and ultimately better, though I don't know if that had anything to do with me. I'd call it malicious when management and or the owner doesn't follow corporate, as well as federal, guidelines, even if it was a franchise and not a company-run location. Management and or the owner, in fact, intentionally commits numerous health and workplace safety violations. They feel it's an inconvenience to actually follow said guidelines, claiming it takes away from precious work time or profits. Management and or the owner tells any employee who voices their concerns to be quiet, go back to work, and even threaten termination if said employee continues to raise a stink or it's suspected/discovered they're the one who reported them to the proper authorities. Well done, my friend. My coworker and I, she trained me, have begun doing something similar to our new manager. I'm glad to hear that it worked out for you and that you got a better job elsewhere. I'm assuming she seems to think that her ways are best, but they are dragging the place down. So we are helping it sink a little lower by cleaning it more than it realistically needs. Customers are starting to complain that we take longer, our shifts never end on time, messing with her hours budget, and we insist on organizing the stock every chance we get, effectively forcing her to move everything at least once a week, since she can't leave it in the logical spot. One of these days I'll have enough for a proper post on here lol. Man, I wish I was like this at my first job. It was a popular fast food place, and it sucked. I once burned my hand on freshly made coffee, literally right as the morning rush was starting, and they wouldn't let me go take care of it. My hand was swollen and purple when I got home. They constantly tried getting me to work more hours and stay until closing, even though I wasn't 18, and I depended on my mom for a ride. I almost failed a couple classes because of them pushing for hours. I did refuse work once there. I'd been trying to learn how to make food there essentially the entire time I worked there, and finally had worn someone down enough to let me try stuff out when it was slow. It was one of these such times that I was back there helping when a manager from another location pulled me aside and told me to clean the bathroom. Now, I honestly cannot remember seeing any employees going to clean the bathroom. I couldn't tell you if it was managers, kitchen or front end staff that did it. But I was mad that out of all the people working that evening, this dude picked me out of the loop. I looked him in the eye and told him I wasn't going to do that. This location was disgusting. I wasn't stepping foot in there to clean. He never even asked another employee, but a couple minutes later I saw him rolling the cleaning stuff over himself. This is awesome. I worked as a general manager for a large pizza chain in the US, and I was a stickler about things being clean. Most of my in-house staff were high school kids and they didn't have much interest in doing things that would get them dirty, and I had to be careful with what side work I gave those who were under 18 because the laws were strict on what they could do. Sometimes it was frustrating getting people to clean to both my and the corporate office standards. Whenever we would have the higher-ups tour, most of the other stores' managers would pull all-nighters to get their stores in order. I had a habit of giving everyone a cleaning task each shift, so that we never had to work extra hours to get the store ready for these visits. I could have used a couple people like you.